Alright folks, the 2024 F1 sprint calendar has dropped and it's not looking good for Miami. It's been one of the 6 tracks selected to host an F1 sprint weekend next year. Now, okay, I'm not saying that the sprint weekend is inherently bad, it could do with some retooling, but it's okay. But why I'm actually really worried for Miami is because it's requiring a little bit more assistance to try and excite the weekend. Las Vegas has turned out to be the biggest Achilles heel that Miami has. It's a huge weakness because Las Vegas has turned out to be really, really good, much better than anybody expected. And I think the 2024 iteration will be even better because they'll have been able to fix all the issues, they might have been able to make amends with the local populace, and it could be a really, really fun weekend and party, much like what Miami was trying to be. And considering that both tracks are being paid for by Formula One themselves, I think we might not see Miami on the calendar for much longer, and there only being 2 American races throughout the entire season. Or hey, we might get back to Indianapolis sometime. Maybe the locals might forgive Formula One after all of these years. Come on, 20 years? You forgive and forget eventually, right? Yes, of course, Miami being selected, this is definitely a publicity stunt to try and drum up more interest, because the last couple of years for Miami haven't been good, because much like with Vegas, there was a lot of public resistance in terms of the locals not really wanting a Formula One track on their doorsteps, and also Miami has a lot more gimmicks as well, like Vegas. But the thing is though, with Vegas, they're a lot more timeless. You get it, you understand it, and it can be cute, so long as you don't go overboard. Whereas Miami, yes, of course, it has pastel colors, teal, pink, 80s vibes, like one Grand Theft Auto game that everybody likes from back in the day. And that's it. And then, of course, there was that really, really cringing opening ceremony, which was a lot better done in Vegas as well. And I think F1's looking at that and going, are we really getting our money back with Miami, especially since all the negative press that they've had the last couple of years, the exorbitant prices, because at least in Vegas you can somewhat justify it, because, come on, it's Vegas, of course it's overpriced. But with Miami though, I think people are less likely to stump up the cash. So that's why I think that this has really been selected for a sprint weekend. And considering where it is in the calendar, I really don't know why the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve hasn't been selected as a sprint weekend. That would be a lot of fun because that's a popular track. I think it's quite well suited. And Baku, which is kind of similar, that's not been selected for a sprint weekend anymore. And that was really good in of itself. So anyway, let me tell you which 6 tracks have been selected. First off, we've got Shanghai. That is if we actually get there, because that's getting a sprint weekend to try and drum up some interest and to make people more aware about the fact that, oh yeah, we actually raced there at one point. I forgot, because yes, of course, there were a lot of public health incidents from back in the day, and ever since then, Formula One has struggled to try and get back there, even though they keep putting it on the calendar, because technically, this season was meant to be 24 races, but we got 22. We obviously knew what happened at Imola, but with Shanghai, that got cancelled or postponed because the Rona hadn't sorted itself out yet. And I'm still a little bit wary about that actually happening for this coming year as well. This could easily get cancelled again for similar concerns. This is definitely just a case of Formula One trying to make amends, try and drum up some interest and get people hyped about the fact they're back in China again. I mean, in terms of a track, this just feels like a publicity stunt rather than an actual good choice. And I think it would have been much more fun if we had a sprint weekend in Suzuka. The Suzuka Sprint! It sounds so good, it rolls off the tongue! Can you imagine all of those F1 drivers going hell for leather around the Suzuka S's, the spoon curve, just going all out, burn through the tyres? That would be so much more fun, wouldn't it? Let me know down in the comments what you think of these selections, because I think Suzuka would have been a lot better than the Shanghai International Circuit. I mean, it's an okay circuit, but for a sprint, nah. We've already talked about Miami. I don't particularly agree with it, but I do think Canada would be a lot better, and it's in a similar place in the calendar as well. And also, much like we got this year, we got 2 sprint weekends in a row at the beginning, then a huge dearth of nothing before we then get to the Red Bull Ring. Okay, I understand that. Red Bull Ring, sprint, yes, that works, because the Austrian Grand Prix is one of the shortest tracks and the fastest tracks on the calendar, so I have no objection with that selection. That seems fine. And one plus that we have had from all of these sprint weekends is that we have been able to ascertain that at least some of the tracks are really geared well towards sprint weekends. But I do think that the spacing out of all of these sprint weekends, considering that we've got one of the longest calendars in the entire history of Formula One, is a little bit janky, because we've got 24 races and only 6 sprint weekends, and most of them, half of them in fact, are in the latter portion of it, with the next one after the Red Bull Ring coming, as we said, at the Circuit of the Americas. And I'm really not too sure about why they picked Austin again, because I wasn't really impressed in terms of the results of what we saw for a sprint weekend at the Circuit of the Americas. It's a great track. It's some really good times for long-form racing, but I suppose it's really just, again, to make the most of the American audiences, make sure they get their money's worth, because F1's been taking a lot of flack about overblown ticket prices and things being really expensive. So especially for the American tracks where that's been a real problem, and especially as we saw this year in Vegas, the track organizers and Formula One probably want to make sure that there's as much racing action going on as possible. And especially at these tracks where there aren't that many support races. I mean, if you go to the Red Bull Ring, you're going to have support races there, at least I believe you are. That's going to be a really, really high value ticket there to go to the Austrian Grand Prix. You get support weekends, you get the sprint weekend. Ooh, that's very, very nice indeed. And then we've got the likes of Brazil and then Qatar. Both of them I have no problems with. Brazil, that always has to be a sprint weekend because it's always been really good and it's been one of the best tracks on the calendar. Really good selection there. I'm glad it's been kept. And the Qatar sprint turned out to be really good as well. And I'm also glad that it's taking place in December and that we are hopefully not going to have any issues regarding drivers overheating. They are actually dealing with that. There have been some talks about maybe allowing drivers to have cooling vests on them throughout the Grand Prix, allowing to have a little bit more weight dispensation so they can actually have some cooling systems on there, little holes in the front to try and get some air to the driver's feet, a little bit of airflow underneath there in the cockpit. That is really good as well. So at least there are some precautions and measures taken to try and cool the drivers down. And not to mention it's taking place a little bit later. That'll be good too. So I don't have any issues with Austria, Brazil and Qatar. Those are fine. China, Miami and Austin, not too sure about those. I'd rather have Suzuka, Canada, and maybe give it a go at Hungary perhaps, because the Hungaroring's pretty fun. I'd like to see a sprint race in Hungary. Unless we've had one already. It's just they've blurred so much lately, I just can't keep track. But another thing they've been talking about is the format of the sprint weekend itself. There are talks that the confirmation in January is going to concern about having the sprint qualifying or the sprint shootout or whatever it's going to be called, starting proceedings off on the Friday, get the sprint race in the morning on Saturday, allowing qualifying to take place for the race after that. And that's when parc fermé conditions would take place. That seems a lot better because that was one of the issues that Austin brought to all of our attention. That you've got so many issues with parc fermé. You got 2 drivers being disqualified because of the right-hand issue, which has rarely happened in the history of Formula One and should have been something that the team should have really taken into account with setup, but they didn't. And yeah, I think they really need to do that because parc fermé conditions from Q1 of qualifying, yeah, that's fine. But then they're also discussing the idea about reverse grids. Now, Formula 2 does this. They reverse the grid for the top 8. And I believe also for pole, they actually give you points as well. Because, yes, if you reverse part of the grid, which is what they're looking to do, they're considering to do, they're not actually officially going to do it yet, this might incentivize things and make it a little bit interesting. Say, for example, Max Verstappen gets pole for sprint qualifying and then starts 8th and has to make his way back up. So whoever qualifies 8th starts at the front. Then you might be concerned that, oh, they won't try so hard and everyone's going to try and qualify 9th or something. But I feel like if you give points to the top 3 qualifiers for the sprint, say if it's just like 3, 2, 1 or something like that, just for qualifying, that will probably counter that little concern that people might just take their foot off the gas or something. And that might be a little bit of an improvement. Who knows? I just think there needs to be some kind of little carrot there dangling in front of the drivers to go like, hey, you better impress for the sprint qualifying or else you're going to get in big trouble. They'll just look like in their party poopers or something like that. But yes, so the sprint qualifying, I do like the idea about making the sprint the first half of the weekend because you're still getting a sprint weekend. You're still getting more action on the Friday, which is what F1 wanted and saw as a very positive plus of the sprint weekend format and the inclusion of it. But I feel like the rest of it really needs to be refined a little more. But I'm really hopeful that these choices could be quite good. Get the sprint out of the way at the beginning, so that's the first half of the weekend, and then the second half is dedicated to the main race. The reverse grid thing, I like it on paper, and F2 does make it work really well. So I just think, why don't you just copy the F2 rules? Nice and simple. It seems to work, it seems to provide a lot of entertainment, and you don't hear anyone in F2 complaining about it. It works, so just bring it to F1. But of course, you got to make sure that everybody votes on it. And this is all speculation, of course. I think even if they just get the change in format, so you get the sprint and then the race bit, that seems fine. But I just feel like, man, Suzuka, Canada, if only. Maybe next year or something. Because now the Japanese Grand Prix is at the beginning of the season because, you know, sustainability and making sure you're in the same area and whatnot. That might be more fun. I'd quite like to see that. And also what I would like to see are your thoughts about my predictions for the 2024 driver transfer selections and how optimistic I was regarding certain drivers who didn't get their due. So go and watch that next.